Hello, my fellow weirdlings. It's Margot. Today I'm bringing you 13 real-life encounters with the mysterious entities known as shadow people. So if you're ready to be spooked and spine-tingled, keep watching. First, I guess we should go over what shadow people are, or at least what we believe them to be. A shadow person, also commonly known as a shadow figure or black mass, is the perception of a patch of shadow as a living humanoid figure. By believers in the paranormal, they're often interpreted as the visible presence of a spirit or other entity. We often see them as fleeting glimpses out of the corner of the eye or lurking in the corner of a room, as a humanoid shape seemingly made entirely out of shadow, though often much blacker than the regular shadows around them. But some are more fuzzy and grayish colored, almost like smoke, or occasionally even white. They appear solid, transparent, or like swirling vapor. With shadow being the relative absence of light, their facial features, clothes, and other details are generally completely indiscernible, though some are said to have glowing red eyes. They range in size from that of human children to adults. They can move through walls and solid objects, and tend to move very quickly once you've spotted them. A number of religions, legends, and belief systems throughout human history describe supernatural entities and various shadowy figures similar to what we'd refer to as shadow people today. Some believe them to be ghosts simply taking on a darker form. Others believe them to be time travelers or beings from an interdimensional plane or even aliens. Others perceive them to be demons, while they've also been perceived as angels. Another suggestion is that they're the result of astral projection, with the shadow representing the essence or soul of a living individual temporarily leaving their body. Or similarly, that they're the result of living people practicing remote viewing, or even people who've been rendered invisible using some sort of top-secret cloaking technology. Shadow people seem to behave differently from ghosts and other spirit phenomena. Orbs and temperature fluctuations are rarely associated with them, although they are commonly seen around areas of other ghostly and spiritual activity. One theory suggests that if they are ghosts or spirits, the shadow form represents human spirits that are lost and trapped on this plane. They don't have recognizable facial features or clothing because they haven't accepted their state of being, leaving them in shadow, with the absence of the light that most spirits encounter as they move on to the next plane after death. In this theory, the sadness or heavy feeling that some witnesses feel upon encountering them emanates from the shadow person's own feelings. They're not negative or harmful entities. They're just overwhelmingly sad. Another theory is that we see them in shadow simply because they exist within a light spectrum our eyes can't process. Shadow people often appear alone, though not always. This lends to the theories that they may be beings traveling across interdimensional planes, aliens, time travelers, or something we're completely unable to define. It's further theorized that we catch glimpses of the shadows during slips between the dimensions, and that we may experience feelings of dread in their presence because a slip in our dimension would have an unpleasant or uncomfortable effect on humans. It's largely because of those dark or uncomfortable feelings that many assume shadow people to be demonic in nature. I'm not fond of labeling things as demonic. It's often done out of a fear of what we don't understand, and it's contributed greatly to things like satanic panic, witch trials, and the persecution of people who don't fit a certain, often purely superstitious or bigoted mold. Then there's the issue of exorcisms, which often amount to the torture and murder of innocent people, many times children. Religious hysteria is dangerous, contagious, and easily triggered even today. Claiming everything is a demon is also downright lazy. When professionals do it, especially in the day of televised ghost hunting and cleansings, it's often done as an attention, clout, or money grab. Just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean it's actually evil or even threatening. Fear is a natural reaction to things we're unfamiliar with, and it's a good thing to have. It can keep us alive in dangerous situations, but it can also overcome us in a way that reveals the darkest side of human nature, and it can be taken out on others who don't deserve it. There's a quote by Anais Nin: "We don't see the world the way it is, we see it as we are." There's a lot of truth to that. Our prejudices, belief systems, and personal worldview greatly filter everything we experience. Keep in mind it's also possible that not all shadow people are even the same sort of entity, or have the same intentions, if any. People have had a wide range of experiences with them, which I'll try to represent here to some degree. There are varying degrees of reported interactions with shadow people. I'll break them down in a way that's similar to the UFO encounter classification system. An encounter of the first degree would be seeing a shadow person out of the corner of your eye, moving quickly across a wall or ducking around a corner, vanishing in an instant. This sort of encounter could leave you questioning whether you actually saw anything at all. An encounter of the second degree would be seeing a shadow person for a more extended period of time, which could still be just a matter of seconds, but long enough to get a better look and be convinced of what you saw. In these extended sightings, it's not uncommon to see the shadow person move in a way that seems very human. The movement of an arm or head, or walking with visible leg motions instead of quickly gliding past, seemingly moving with purpose. They may even move in a way that seems to be in reaction to your own movements or response to seeing them. You may detect a more defined physical shape that gives an indication of the shadow person's presumed gender or clothing style. The rarest sort of encounter with a shadow person is that of the third degree, where a witness is actually touched or otherwise tangibly affected by the entity, though they may not physically feel it. For the sake of this conversation, I'm going to assume everything stated in these accounts is true. I will go over the skeptical side of things toward the end of the video. Now, let's get on with the stories. I'm going to start off with a positive shadow person experience, which would appear to be a recurring encounter of the second degree, as told by a woman named Merrick. She says, "Whenever I'm bedridden from terrible migraines, my son says there's a shadow man standing at the foot of my bed or by the window. We've lived in many countries, and he always comes when my migraines are extremely bad or I'm very sick. When my son was little, the shadow man would make faces at him to make him laugh, and would also tell him to be calm when he was being naughty. Now he just stands guard. I've never seen him, but my son, who's now a teenager, does. He doesn't play with him anymore, but does nod to him, as if to say it will all be okay. We've tried things like asking him to leave, but he just smiles, shakes his head, and waits until I'm feeling better before disappearing. Is this a relative or an angel? He's certainly looking out for me and seems very kind and fun, but with a job to do." Many people would have this exact same experience and still see it as terrifying or threatening just because they're dealing with a seemingly paranormal phenomenon they're unfamiliar with, even though no evidence points to this being a negative encounter. In fact, it sounds rather comforting. That's just something to think about as we hear the rest of these. This is a longer story that involves shadow people that the homeowner perceived as both good and evil. These would be recurring encounters of the first degree and one of the second degree, mostly caught out of the corner of the eye as brief glimpses. MSF says, "I became aware of the shadows shortly after moving into my house in New Jersey. My daughter's playroom was in the basement, and they were constantly complaining that they were always seeing something move out of the corners of their eyes. My youngest also said they hovered near the ceiling. In later years, I had my floral workshop in the basement and saw them constantly. It got to the point where I talked to them with my mind, not that they ever answered back. They were black. We saw them all over the basement, but mostly along one wall, and we occasionally saw them along the same wall on the first floor and in the kitchen near the back door. We didn't see them anywhere else in the house or anywhere else on the property, but even when we didn't get a glimpse of them, we were aware when they were present. Some of them seemed to have an evil presence. A few years after we moved in, I told them they were not welcome in the house and the evil presence seemed to go away. Still, we had an uneasy feeling about them. Not fear, we just accepted they were there, as several steps taken over the years to make them go away didn't work anyway. Only once after the evil ones were told they weren't welcome was I aware they came back, and I'm not sure if they were evil or just upset. I'll explain later. Only once did I see one clearly, but it happened in a split second and I didn't see it from top to bottom. I was walking through the breakfast room into the kitchen. The kitchen light was on in the corner. It was by the back door in front of the stove. I was startled. I thought someone had come into the house. It all happened very fast, but the light from behind it didn't pass through as it would a shadow. It was short and stocky and appeared as a silhouette of a person. It had a head, though there were no discernible features, including no eyes. It had shoulders, arms, and a torso. It disappeared too fast to take note if it had legs or feet. I sensed it was as surprised as I was and didn't intend to be seen. Then our house caught fire. It was a major fire that started from a shorted TV in the den. We were out of the house for 6 months while it was repaired. About a week after the fire, I stopped by right before dark to pick up a few things. As I came onto the back porch and looked through the 6-foot hole where the picture window once was, I looked across the breakfast room at the basement doorway. I sensed 3 shadows near the doorway. It was almost dark outside, so I didn't actually see them. I also got a very bad feeling about them and told them by thought that the evil ones were still not welcome in the house, whether I was there or not. Then I turned and left without entering the house. I was quite rattled. Whether I had this feeling because I was emotionally upset about the fire, I can't say. The next day I went back, and it seemed the house was full of shadows, although I only caught a glimpse of them, as usual, fleeing in the basement. And I'm not sure I really saw them, as there were no lights on down there, and the only light was from the window well windows. It was the only time I ever sensed that they tried to communicate. It seemed they were upset that we weren't there. Because the house was all black, there was no light for them in the kitchen, and there were strangers in the house, the workers, every day. A few weeks later, burglars tried to steal the new appliances for the house. Everything was left in the kitchen by the back door. My daughters and I joked that they met up with the shadows and were scared off. Who knows? I really want to think it was the shadow people that scared off MSF's burglars. I wish they'd had security cameras. I'm not sure if I'd categorize this next one as negative or positive. I guess it's more of a neutral encounter, though definitely a bit unsettling. Jean says, I've seen shadow people at least twice. The most recent was while sitting in front of a TV that was turned off. The reflection showed a dark entity seated beside me. I was annoyed and soon it was gone. I hope I never have another experience like it again. Jean also shared, a long time ago I saw what appeared to be a man wearing a top hat who moved in the shadows of a great building. He appeared to look almost like a phantom, appearing as though he consisted of electromagnetic signals. That's an interesting description, and I've heard of other stories of seeing shadow people in reflective surfaces. Perhaps there are periods of time in our lives, whether long or very brief, in which we're more open or able to see entities like shadow people. Or maybe the same shadow person can follow us around, like we heard about in our first story. Either way, a man shared these 2 stories from one 24-hour period when he was 13 years old. Jason says, I've always been very observant, and I notice everything around me in detail. When I was 13, I was riding home from the supermarket with my older brother. All of a sudden, a dark figure dove under the car. It happened very quickly, but I saw it straight on. It was definitely in the shape of a man, and it seemed to appear out of nowhere. I just saw a shadow man, I said to my brother. Of course, he made a joke of it. I went along with it, but it was more than a joke to me. I saw another shadow man that very night when I got out of bed to go to the bathroom. I know it was not my mind playing tricks. It does seem that puberty and other times of great emotional or hormonal turbulence can open us up to paranormal phenomena. I've seen it a lot in my own life, and it's a recurring factor in other people's stories. It makes me wonder what was unique about that one particular day for Jason. I'm including this one because it's a good example of what I was saying before about labeling things as demonic with the negative connotations that come with that word. This often comes up when people talk about Ouija boards. At most times, it just stems from the societal and religious biases against them. Manda says, I'm pretty sure the shadow people are demons. One night I was having a party, and I had just gotten a Ouija board for my birthday. Everyone talked me into using it, so we started playing. Then weird stuff started happening. Shadow figures started to appear in my room. A lot of shadow people. It wasn't any of our shadows. These were different. Some had red eyes. Then red orbs started coming through my room. We made a protective circle, and we all tried to stay in it. It got really cold in my room, and we could all see our breath. If some of my friends couldn't see the shadow people, they could feel them. There was an all-out evil feeling in the room. We all got too freaked out to move. We were just like, whoa. Then one of the shadow people changed. It got all scary looking. I could explain, but I don't want to go into detail. Let's just say Pumpkinhead, the demon guy from scary movies. Though, no, the shadow man's head wasn't a pumpkin. So we screamed and finally ran out of the room. My parents thought we were crazy. That night when we went to bed, my closets were glowing red, and orbs were going through my room. We didn't go to sleep until like 5 a.m., and even then we only slept not even 4 hours. That was freaky, and stuff didn't die down for a while after that. That was the last time I used the Ouija board. I threw it somewhere deep down in one of my closets. Now I've only used Psychic Circle, and even that has consequences. I'm not allowed to use it anymore because of what happened to me, my friend, and my mom, but that's another story for another time. So, what in this story specifically gave the impression that the entities were evil or demonic? Not to pick on Manda, who I'm sure was very frightened, but it's often stories like this that get retold as proof that Ouija boards are evil, though nothing bad actually happened. Causing a ruckus or scaring kids at a sleepover isn't inherently evil. Assuming every detail of this story is absolutely true and not a figment of anyone's imagination, the worst that happened was that something occurred that Manda and her friends were unfamiliar with, and it scared the crap out of them. The dropping temperature and glowing orbs makes me wonder if this was something other than shadow people, just presenting in a shadow form. There's nothing intrinsically negative or evil about the color red, as in the red eyes and red orbs mentioned here, but in a lot of these stories the colors red or black are often cited as proof of demonic or negative entities. Next time you catch yourself falling into that way of thinking, take a moment and ask yourself why. It can actually help you overcome a lot of fears. Also, I wish she'd added the story about the Psychic Circle game. This one's interesting because it mentions a shadow person seemingly passing through the body of the homeowner. I'd count this as a rare encounter of the third degree, which happened to a man named Michael in the fall of 1998. Michael had just purchased a home and had spent the day painting it with the help of some of his friends. After his friends went home, though he hadn't moved in yet, he decided to sleep there in a beanbag chair. He awoke in the night and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Michael says, "That's when I got a distinct feeling that someone was watching me. There at the top of the basement stairs and in front of the light switch. I could distinctly make out the figure of what I automatically assumed was my good friend Larry. He called out to Larry but got no response. He said, I was still absolutely convinced that I was looking at a living person. My guard went up with the dangerous possibilities of who it could be." He took out his pocket knife. He says, "Then, in an instant, the shadow moved forward in my direction. I lunged forward with the knife extended outward. I saw the shadow move into my arm as if deliberately trying to impale itself on my weapon, and it kept on coming. Michael screamed, and the shadow figure moved straight through his body. He says, I spun around in a circular motion 180 degrees. I saw the shadow moving at an almost leisurely pace away from me. It proceeded through the large kitchen into the adjoining dining room, and finally through the wall that would have led outside if it were a door. Michael turned on the light switch, searched the house, and found nothing. After that, he returned to his old apartment for the rest of the night. He never saw the shadow figure again while living in his new house. One thing he did note was that there were paint fumes in the house. He seems to be unsure if that could have been a factor, along with his sleepiness perhaps causing a hallucination. He also wondered if it might be associated with the address ending in 666, or that the house was aligned with magnetic north, both of which I'm inclined to disregard. To me, it sounds like an entity connected with the house was just curious about the new inhabitant. It's really common for paranormal activity to occur when moving into or renovating a house. Or it could have been some sort of residual haunting, with the entity not even realizing Michael was there. Or he could have been half asleep and inadvertently huffing too many paint fumes. This one involves multiple shadow people. I wanted to make sure to include a couple stories that did involve groups of shadow people, because it's generally thought that they appear alone. In my experience, that's not always the case. It's not even uncommon to find multiple shadow people in one location, or even occasionally seemingly interacting with each other. When Isophi was 5 or 6 years old, they went to play in their backyard and saw 3 male figures who they described as pitch black, standing side by side on the trampoline, wearing matching hats. Isophi yelled at the strange shadow men to get off. Hearing this, their parents raced outside. To this day, their parents recall how terrified their young child was. Isophi told their parents what they'd seen, but when they all looked, the shadow people were gone. Isophi didn't get on the trampoline again for 2 years. Isophi's grandmother later told them she'd awoken to a dark figure standing above her many times at that house. And one night, Isophi's mother woke to find a dark figure standing over her sleeping husband. They've since moved houses, but the shadow people seem to have moved with them. I will say the actual shadow people I've encountered have appeared to be location-based. I haven't known them to follow me, my team, or any of my clients from place to place. Other entities, yes, but not shadow people. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I haven't experienced everything, so I find it fascinating to hear other people's stories, especially when their experiences are different from mine. I'm including this one that involves sleep deprivation because it's one of the explanations skeptics often use for seeing shadow people. In fact, the person sharing this experience feels they were having an episode of lucid dreaming, so this may not even be about actual shadow people at all. Here's their story. Lostful Codex laid down for a midday nap after a restless night. They recall feeling a strange sensation in their head before drifting off to sleep, but assumed it to be a result of sleep deprivation. Then, from the corner of their room, they heard the sound of South Park on TV. The sound was coming from right beside their bed, though there was no TV there. Soon they heard a high-pitched ringing and whooshing sound, and try as they might, they found themselves unable to lift their arms or head. Then they heard a knock at the bedroom window, and could see a dark, faceless figure crouched behind the glass pane. Even more terrifying, a second identical figure entered through the bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed. Lostful Codex was sure it was a dream, but it felt inescapable. The shadow person spoke, saying, "I would be afraid too. This is what nightmares are made from." The room faded in and out. Then Lostful Codex woke. It was the scariest experience they'd ever had with lucid dreaming. This reads like a creepypasta. To me, it sounds like this could have been sleep paralysis, but it makes me wonder whether sleep deprivation, lucid dreaming, or sleep paralysis can put us in a condition to be more able to see the other side or paranormal entities. A lot of people believe there is some correlation between the two. Or do those sleep disorders serve as scientific explanations to rule out the paranormal, as many skeptics believe? Many skeptics also believe that seeing shadow people is often a symptom of mental illness. It's also speculated that shadow people reflect our own emotions, either by manifesting in our imaginations due to a mental or emotional imbalance, or as real paranormal entities that use that heightened emotional energy to manifest. In this story, a woman named Barbara seems to be quite unsure of where her experiences with shadow entities are stemming from. Barbara says, "I've been seeing something similar to shadow people for a long time now. Although the shadows I see don't look like people exactly, and they're in the bottom corners of the house. I see them from the corner of my eye, and they're smoky, but they're shapeless and dissipate as soon as I look head on at them, usually around a corner. I definitely get a malevolent feeling from them, though. I always believed them to be demons and still do, as I don't believe in life after death or aliens and ghosts. I'm seeing a psychiatrist for clinical depression, and finally told him about it as it was bothering me. I told him I thought I was going crazy, and of course he immediately put me on a psychotropic drug and wanted to know if I heard voices too, which I thought was crazy. I haven't been on the drug long enough to see if it will change my seeing them. Somehow, I get the feeling of just having told someone that I won't see them anymore, though. Would that be a placebo effect? It always seems strange to me that so many people will insist they don't believe in ghosts, but they fully believe in demons. I guess this is how everything they don't understand gets labeled as a demon. I'm not saying they should believe in one, the other, or both, but it's just interesting to me how people come to these conclusions. Often they haven't familiarized themselves with either topic, so I'm not sure how they've even fully formed an opinion. In this particular case, it would be interesting to know if the medication helped. I don't think this next one was actually a shadow person. I'll let you hear the story and then I'll tell you why. Anathium has had a few encounters with shadow people, but there's only one that truly terrified them. On a summer evening, they stayed up late watching TV with their sister. As they got up to go to bed, they passed by the front door and saw a Native American man standing in the doorway. He stood at about 6'5" tall, wore a black suit with an old-fashioned top hat, and had long hair and sharp blue eyes. Anathium screamed, causing their sister to jump up and impulsively throw a salt shaker at the figure. The shadow person's face fell into what seemed like a sorrowful expression, then shimmered away through the front door. Later, when describing the experience to their father, he said the shadow person sounded like the description of his great-uncle, who died when he was young. If this were a shadow person, just judging from descriptions from other encounters, I don't think you'd be able to see so much detail, like that the man appeared to be Native American, or that he had sharp blue eyes, or his face-changing expression. This may have been more of a classic ghost encounter, like a full-body apparition. The change in facial expression indicates the entity could have been cognizant of the living people present, which is interesting. It makes me want to hear about their other encounters with what they thought were shadow people. This one's about an encounter with a shadow person that remained visible for a remarkably long time, and was even seen by multiple people. The witness is anonymous. We live in a fairly new double-wide mobile home that sits on a spot that had never had a house of any kind, and was at least half a mile from where any house had ever sat, so you wouldn't think it would be a likely location for a haunting. However, my wife and I have, on occasion, seen some rather strange things there, the most startling of which I relate here. One night, after an uneventful day, my wife and I retired for the night. We sleep in a large waterbed. Some time had passed and I was unable to sleep. My wife's breathing had become regular and reached a point at which I assumed she was asleep. It must be also known that we leave a light on in the bathroom farthest from our bedroom, because we normally have children in the house. However, that night there was no one in the house except my wife and I, but the light was on as usual, casting a glow through our open bedroom door, which weakly lit it. While lying there, unable to sleep, I became aware of a presence. Suddenly and silently, a figure moved through our bedroom door and proceeded parallel to our bed. Then, rounding the corner of our bed, it took up a fixed position at the foot of our bed. I was aware that this entity was conscious of us and was intently watching us as we lay there. The entity can best be described as something that had the appearance of black smoke or a shadow. However, it was more material than either of these, but less material than a real person. The oddest thing about this was my lack of fear. Although I was acutely aware of this being and the fact it was not of this earth as we perceive it, it didn't seem to arouse any fear response in me. I'd say it aroused a feeling that would fit somewhere between creepy, odd, and curiosity, especially considering the fact that it was as aware of me as I was aware of it. After some time, I almost convinced myself that I was imagining it. But then I became aware of the fact that my wife was no longer breathing like she was asleep, but was breathing almost silently. I then said, "Honey, you awake?" To which she answered, "Yes." Then I said, "Do you see anything?" expecting her reply to be, "What do you mean?" But much to my surprise, she said, "You mean that thing standing at the foot of the bed?" At this time, I did become somewhat nervous. We laid there for about 10 minutes, and then it was gone. In just over a period of about 10 seconds, it became less solid and our perception of its presence became weaker until it just wasn't there anymore. Then it was as if it had never been there. Nothing like this has happened since, and the only evidence it ever existed is my wife's and my memory of it. Kinda makes you wonder how often we're watched while we sleep, doesn't it? Our last two stories for today dive into some intriguing theories I came across in my online meanderings. This story is, for lack of a better term, weird. For one thing, the shadow people are blue. For another, they appear to be very interactive, and they seem to be a bit less humanoid than other shadow people have been described. They also don't sound like they're seemingly made of shadow. Well, I'll let you listen and come to your own conclusions. DM says, "I have recurring visitations from a life form that I call the blue people. They don't really look like humans, though. They're about 4 feet tall, they walk erect on legs, but the knees bend backward. They have 4 fingers and 2 thumbs, and roughly the same configuration on their feet. The toes and fingers are webbed. They have no shoulders and no neck. They just go up from the shoulders into a bulbous head. The face consists of 3 crescents that are arched down like a grimace, the shortest on top and the longest at the bottom. They're blue. They've visited me for about 5 years now, to my knowledge. They come late at night when everything is quiet. The first thing, and the thing that wakes me, is a high-pitched whine. That's followed by a white light that appears through the wall, door, or wherever they choose to enter from. They come in through the light when it opens enough for them to pass. I was quite scared at first and thought I was having a lucid nightmare. Later, though, when they returned several times, I realized they were benevolent and only curious about this world. They'd walk about my room, look at things, and try to touch things. For a long time, when I tried to speak to them, they'd rush back into the light and disappear. I tried everything to set up some kind of communication. Only recently did I have a breakthrough of sorts. When I opened my mouth to speak, one of them rushed over and put his hand on my mouth. I got quiet and it touched my eyes, and then touched my ears. Then it touched the 3 crescents on its face, then touched my eyes and ears again. One thing I must interject is that they have no physical form here. I mean, they're kind of like ghosts, so when I say they touched me, it wasn't like really being touched. It took me a while to put it all together, but I have done so, and the message is that they see with sound. My voice blinded them and scared them. It may even have injured them. I think they're dimensional explorers, and I think they'd like to communicate. I'm working on different approaches to doing that. I do see similarities to shadow people in this story, and to the earlier story that possibly involved lucid dreaming. It also sounds similar to reported encounters with extraterrestrials, which of course is one of the theories about what shadow people might be. If that is the case, I don't see why they couldn't come in different colors, or why one of those colors couldn't be blue. A reader responded to a Live About article about shadow people with the following theory. Brandon W. says, I was reading your article on the shadow people and noticed that you overlooked an obvious theory, the Mothman. Am I the only one that noticed this? Some of the descriptions and sketches of the shadow people seem very similar to the Mothman. The black shadowy figure, the glowing red eyes, and the feeling of dread. All of these have at some point been used in descriptions of the Mothman and the shadow people. Maybe these shadow people are the same beings as the Mothman. Okay, the Mothman had a little more power, its hypnotic abilities, the electrical disturbances that occurred when he was around. Perhaps it was some kind of super shadow being. Yeah, I know, that sounds corny. Mothman sightings have recently sprouted up again around the world, and these shadow people have just recently begun letting themselves be seen easier. Maybe they are one and the same. I think Brandon W. brings up some good points, and no, he's not the only one who's noticed this. I briefly mentioned the Mothman in my recent video, More Real-Life Encounters with the Men in Black, and I can do a whole video on the topic if you want one. As I mentioned earlier, skeptics have entirely different explanations for the shadow people phenomenon. These include sleep paralysis, night terrors, heightened emotion, causing the witness to be hyper-vigilant and paranoid, perceiving shadows as a threat, the use of certain drugs, sleep deprivation, or visual hallucinations caused by mental illnesses. I'd argue that many, perhaps even most people who've experienced shadow people were dealing with none of the factors listed above. So what does it mean when you encounter shadow people while sane, sober, calm, and fully alert? One scientific explanation is that when we see these figures, it's simply our minds filling in the blank spaces and creating something human-like from the shapes that we can see. In paranormal investigation, we take into consideration a concept called matrixing, also known as pareidolia, apophenia, or anthropomorphizing. Matrixing is a term used to describe the human mind's natural tendency to find familiar shapes in complex formations or colors, like when you detect a face in the shapes and shadows of objects, reflections, or patterned surfaces. Our brains have a tendency to take everything we see, hear, touch, or smell and immediately relate it to something we're familiar with. This is what your mind is doing when it sees shapes in clouds or ghostly faces in the frost on a window. And I know this will disappoint some people. It's usually what's happening when you spot ghostly faces or figures in photographs. I'm sure this can account for many shadow people encounters, but what of the others? I have a strong respect for science, but it can't explain everything. It's limited to the scientific knowledge we humans possess at this time, and that's constantly changing. Part of science is recognizing that nobody has all of the answers. Our knowledge and our ideas change with each new piece of information we gain. Or at least that's how it should work. We learn and adapt as we go. With any unexplained phenomena, I think we should approach it with curiosity and an open mind, while also exploring non-paranormal explanations. Not having all of the answers is okay, and nothing to fear. We don't need explanations for everything. That's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this topic and will come back for more. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and bring your friends, family, COVID pod, cult members, invisible friends, or enemies. And if you've had any experiences with shadow people, I'd love to hear all about them. Thanks so much for watching.